Hi, I'm Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
The November fog of 1895 lay thick upon London like a grey shroud, muffling the familiar sounds of Baker Street and casting the gas lamps in ethereal halos that seemed to float, suspended in the murky air. I had been attempting to complete my notes on our recent adventure involving the Bermondsey silk merchant when the sharp rap of knuckles against our door shattered the comfortable silence of our sitting room. The fire crackled pleasantly in the grate, and Holmes, stretched languidly in his favourite chair, with his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, raised one eyebrow with the mild interest of a cat hearing a distant mouse. "At this hour, Watson?" he murmured, consulting his pocket watch. "Past 11 o'clock, and in such weather. Either someone has met with genuine misfortune, or we are about to receive a visit from Inspector Lestrade, bearing one of his more perplexing puzzles." As if summoned by my friend's words, Mrs. Hudson's voice drifted up from below, followed by the familiar tread of the inspector's boots upon our 17 steps. The door opened to admit Lestrade, his usually composed demeanour replaced by an expression of bewilderment that bordered on genuine distress. Behind him followed a tall, nervous gentleman in railway uniform, his cap clutched anxiously in his gloved hands. "Holmes!" Lestrade called out, seemingly oblivious to the late hour. "Thank God you're in. We have a situation that defies every principle of rational investigation." My friend's grey eyes sharpened with interest as he gestured toward the chairs near the fire. "Inspector Lestrade and—" He turned his penetrating gaze upon our second visitor. "Reginald Hartwell, sir," the railway official replied with a slight bow. "Chief Station Master at Victoria Station. I apologize for the intrusion at such an hour, but the circumstances are most extraordinary." Holmes waved a dismissive hand. "The hour is of no consequence when mystery calls, Mr. Hartwell. Pray be seated, both of you. Watson, your notebook, if you please. Now then, Inspector, what has brought you through the fog with such urgency?" Lestrade pulled out his notebook with hands that trembled slightly, consulting it as though he scarcely believed his own observations. "At 10:47 this evening, the overnight express from Edinburgh arrived at Victoria Station on platform 7. The train was carrying 38 passengers, including a gentleman named Sir Bartholomew Ashford, who had reserved a private first-class compartment for the journey to London. "A perfectly routine occurrence," Holmes observed, though I detected the familiar note of anticipation creeping into his voice. "What transforms this ordinary arrival into a matter for Scotland Yard?" Mr. Hartwell leaned forward, his face pale in the firelight. "Mr. Holmes, the train that arrived this evening was scheduled to depart Edinburgh tomorrow morning at 8:15. According to every timetable, every conductor's log, and every station master's records, that particular service should not have existed tonight." The silence that followed was profound. Holmes leaned back in his chair, his fingers pressed together in that characteristic gesture that indicated his complete attention was now engaged. "You are suggesting," Holmes said slowly, "that a train arrived nearly 10 hours before its scheduled departure time?" "I am stating a fact," Lestrade replied, his voice tight with frustration, "that has been verified by no fewer than 4 railway officials and the conductor himself. The Edinburgh station master confirms that the 8:15 morning service departed on schedule, but that was this morning's departure, which should arrive tomorrow evening. This train, the one that arrived tonight, appears in no schedule, carries no official documentation, yet bears all the correct markings and carries passengers who insist their journey was perfectly normal." Holmes rose from his chair and began his familiar pacing before the fireplace. "And Sir Bartholomew Ashford?" "Found dead in his compartment when the train was being prepared for cleaning," Lestrade continued grimly. "The compartment was locked from the inside, the windows were secured, and there are no obvious signs of violence. The gentleman appears to have died peacefully in his sleep, yet—" He paused, consulting his notes once more. "Yet?" Holmes prompted. Mr. Hartwell spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yet his ticket, Mr. Holmes, was issued for tomorrow's 8:15 departure from Edinburgh. The ticket office has no record of selling passage for tonight's journey because no such journey was scheduled to exist." Holmes stopped his pacing abruptly, his eyes brightening with that unmistakable gleam that appeared whenever a particularly intriguing puzzle presented itself. A dead man aboard an impossible train, carrying a ticket for a journey that had not yet begun. Watson, I believe we have encountered a mystery that will challenge our most fundamental assumptions about the nature of time, scheduling, and human mortality. I gathered my coat and medical bag, already knowing that our quiet evening had come to an abrupt end. As we prepared to accompany our visitors to Victoria Station, I couldn't help but notice how the fog seemed to press against our windows with unusual persistence, as though the very atmosphere of London had conspired to shroud this impossible occurrence in appropriate mystery. "One question, Mr. Hartwell," Holmes said as he donned his ulster. "This phantom train, what was its destination according to the locomotive's headboard?" The station master's face grew even paler. "That's perhaps the most disturbing detail of all, Mr. Holmes. The destination board read simply, 'Tomorrow.' The fog swirled around us as we stepped into the night, and I found myself wondering whether we were walking into a mystery that belonged to the rational world of criminal investigation, or had stumbled upon something far more extraordinary than even Sherlock Holmes had previously encountered. The journey through London's fog-shrouded streets provided an appropriately mysterious prelude to what awaited us at Victoria Station. Our hansom cab moved through the thick mist like a vessel navigating treacherous waters, the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves on wet cobblestones creating an oddly hypnotic accompaniment to the increasingly bizarre details that Lestrade continued to share during our passage through the night. "The passengers themselves, Inspector?" Holmes inquired, his voice cutting through the muffled sounds of the city. "What do they recall of their journey?" Lestrade shifted uncomfortably, consulting his notebook by the dim light of the cab's interior lamp. "That's where matters become even more perplexing, Holmes. I've spoken with several of them personally. They all insist they boarded the morning departure from Edinburgh at 8:15, travelled for the standard duration, and arrived precisely when expected. When confronted with the obvious discrepancy in time, they looked at me as though I had taken leave of my senses." "And the crew?" Holmes pressed, his sharp profile barely visible in the shifting shadows. Mr. Hartwell cleared his throat nervously. "The conductor, Thomas Whitmore, has worked this route for 12 years. He swears he departed Edinburgh on schedule this morning, made all the usual stops and arrived at the proper time. The engineer tells an identical story. Both men appear genuinely bewildered by our questions about the time discrepancy." As our cab drew to a halt outside Victoria Station, the great iron and glass edifice loomed through the fog like some Victorian cathedral dedicated to the gods of steam and progress. Despite the late hour, unusual activity buzzed around the platforms where constables mingled with nervous railway officials, their lanterns casting dancing shadows against the mist-laden air. Holmes remained seated for a moment after we alighted, his keen eyes surveying the scene with that familiar intensity that indicated his mind was already cataloguing every detail. The fog seemed to part reluctantly as we approached Platform 7, revealing the silent bulk of the locomotive, standing like some great mechanical beast at rest. "Observe, Watson," Holmes murmured as we walked alongside the train. "The engine shows precisely the wear one would expect from an 8-hour journey. The coal dust patterns, the water levels in the tender, even the temperature of the boiler, all correspond to a normal run from Edinburgh." He paused beside the coupling, running his finger along a streak of fresh grease. Yet this lubricant was applied hastily, not in a proper yard maintenance. Mr. Hartwell nodded grimly. We moved the train from the main platform as quickly as possible. The destination board was causing quite a stir among the night staff. Indeed, the brass plate mounted before the smoke box bore the simple, unsettling legend, "Tomorrow." Holmes examined it closely, scraping a small flake of paint with his fingernail. Fresh lacquer, not fully cured. This was prepared within the last 24 hours. We were then conducted to the first-class compartment, where Sir Bartholomew Ashford had met his end. The door, its internal bolt forced by station officials, opened to reveal a scene of apparent peaceful repose. The gentleman sat in the corner seat, his head resting against the antimacassar, his silver hair neatly arranged, his clothing undisturbed, save for a single unfastened waistcoat button. Holmes immediately began his methodical examination, first observing without touching, then gradually moving closer to inspect specific details. "The ventilator above the door, Watson. Note the smudge along its rim as though recently adjusted." He struck a match and watched its flame carefully. "No unusual drafts, yet there's something—" He crouched beside the seat, drawing out his magnifying glass to examine a greyish residue gathered where the floor met the carriage wall. "Gas lighting system?" Holmes inquired of Mr. Hartwell. "Pinch cylinders, all properly maintained and inspected," came the nervous reply. Holmes nodded absently, his attention now focused on a faint, waxy mark on the window glass, no larger than a pea, with a single blue fibre attached. He carefully extracted both with his penknife, wrapping them in his handkerchief. From the dead man's pocket protruded a slim volume of sermons, and pressed within its pages Holmes discovered a dried fern frond and an inscription, "To be, for the road that lies ahead, E.C." "Who was expected to meet Sir Bartholomew?" Holmes asked, straightening from his examination. "His valet, Mr. Cobb," Lestrade replied. "We have him waiting in the station-master's office. He received a telegram yesterday confirming tonight's arrival, which should have been impossible given the scheduling." Holmes's eyes brightened with interest. "The telegram is preserved." "Indeed it is." "Excellent. We shall examine it presently." Holmes cast one final comprehensive glance around the compartment, as if committing every detail to his remarkable memory. "Mr. Hartwell, I must insist that nothing in this carriage be disturbed. No lamp touched, no valve adjusted, no surface cleaned. Our phantom train has presented us with a puzzle that challenges the very nature of time itself, and every detail may prove crucial to its solution." The station-master's office provided a welcome respite from the fog-shrouded platform, its warm gaslight casting a golden glow over the cramped but orderly space filled with ledgers, timetables, and the accumulated detritus of railway administration. Mr. Hartwell gestured toward a man who rose nervously from a wooden chair beside the desk, his black mourning attire impeccable despite the late hour and extraordinary circumstances. "Gentlemen, this is Mr. Edmund Cobb, Sir Bartholomew's personal valet for the past 15 years, Hartwell announced, his voice carrying the weight of the evening's strange events. Cobb inclined his head respectfully, though his hands trembled slightly as he clutched a worn leather portfolio. His eyes, red-rimmed with grief and bewilderment, fixed upon Holmes with the desperate hope of a man seeking answers to questions that defied rational explanation. "Mr. Holmes," Cobb began, his voice carefully controlled, "I confess myself entirely at a loss. My master was a gentleman of the most precise habits, methodical in all his affairs. This business of arriving on a train that should not exist, it goes against everything I knew of Sir Bartholomew's character." Holmes settled into the chair opposite the valet, his keen eyes studying the man's face with that penetrating intensity that seemed to read volumes in the smallest gesture or expression. "Yet you received notification of his arrival this evening. Tell me about this telegram, Mr. Cobb, and pray be as exact as possible in your recollection." Cobb reached into his waistcoat with trembling fingers and produced a yellow telegraph form, its edges slightly worn from handling. "It arrived yesterday afternoon at precisely 3:15, sir. I remember the time because I was preparing Sir Bartholomew's evening correspondence when the boy brought it to the door." Holmes accepted the telegram with the reverence of an archaeologist handling an ancient artifact. Under the bright gaslight, he examined every aspect of the document, from the quality of the paper to the precise formation of each letter. His eyebrows rose with interest as he read the brief message aloud. "Arriving Victoria tonight. Platform 7. Stop urgent business concluded successfully. Stop prepare. Usual arrangements. Stop Ashford." "Fascinating," Holmes murmured, passing the telegram to me for examination. "Watson, observe the paper stock. Standard telegraphic issue, yet the watermark suggests Edinburgh origin. The ink shows no signs of alteration, and the handwriting, while necessarily brief, matches the samples of Sir Bartholomew's correspondence I observed in his compartment." He paused, his fingers steepled in that characteristic gesture. "Mr. Cobb, what were these usual arrangements your master referenced?" "Sir Bartholomew maintained a suite at the Langham Hotel when conducting business in London," Cobb explained, his voice growing steadier as he focused on familiar details. "I was to collect his luggage, arrange transportation, and ensure his rooms were prepared with his preferred newspapers and correspondence. He travelled to Edinburgh monthly to attend to matters concerning his late brother's estate." "His late brother's estate," Holmes repeated thoughtfully. "How recently deceased, and what manner of business required such regular attention?" Cobb's expression darkened slightly. "Lord Ashford passed 6 months ago, sir, leaving considerable complications. The estate includes mining interests in the Highlands, substantial debts, and various legal entanglements. Sir Bartholomew found the responsibility quite burdensome, particularly as certain parties seemed determined to contest various aspects of the inheritance." Holmes leaned forward, his voice taking on that deceptively casual tone that often preceded his most incisive questions. "What manner of parties, Mr. Cobb, and had your master expressed any particular anxieties about his most recent journey?" The valet hesitated, wringing his hands as he chose his words carefully. "Sir Bartholomew was a private gentleman, sir, but in recent weeks he seemed troubled by correspondence from someone signing themselves with the initials E.C. The letters arrived frequently, and after reading them my master would often pace his study for hours, muttering about impossible demands and dangerous precedents." "E.C., Holmes repeated, his eyes brightening with interest. "Did you ever observe this correspondent directly?" "A woman called twice at the house, sir, always heavily veiled and speaking with what I took to be a continental accent. She would remain closeted with Sir Bartholomew for considerable periods, and after her visits, he invariably seemed agitated. There was also a gentleman with distinctive red whiskers who arrived carrying a leather satchel and claimed to be a consulting engineer familiar with mining operations." Holmes rose from his chair and began his familiar pacing within the confines of the small office, his mind clearly working at tremendous speed. "Mr. Cobb, I must ask you to think very carefully. When you last saw your master alive, did he carry with him his usual travelling effects?" "Indeed, sir, his gold pocket watch, his travelling purse, and most importantly, his small, leather-bound journal. Sir Bartholomew was meticulous about recording his observations and business transactions. He never travelled without it. Holmes stopped his pacing abruptly. "This journal, describe it precisely." "Moroccan leather, sir, about the size of a prayer book, with brass corners and a small lock. He'd had it for years and guarded it most carefully." "Inspector Lestrade," Holmes said sharply, "was such a journal found among Sir Bartholomew's effects?" Lestrade consulted his notebook, frowning. "No journal was catalogued, Holmes. We found his watch, purse, ticket and various papers, but no journal matching that description." Holmes's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Excellent. We now have our first concrete indication that Sir Bartholomew's death was not the peaceful natural occurrence it was staged to appear." He turned back to Cobb. "Tell me, did your master ever mention meeting anyone new during his Edinburgh visits? Anyone who might have possessed specialized knowledge of railway operations or scheduling?" Cobb's brow furrowed with concentration. "He did mention consulting with various technical experts about the mining operations, sir. There was particular reference to someone he called an ingenious fellow with revolutionary ideas about transportation and timing. Sir Bartholomew seemed both impressed and somewhat concerned by this person's proposals." Holmes exchanged a meaningful glance with me before addressing the room at large. "Gentlemen, what we have before us is not merely the puzzle of an impossible train, but a carefully orchestrated deception designed to disguise murder as natural death. The missing journal, the mysterious correspondence, the technical expertise required to manipulate railway scheduling all point to a conspiracy of considerable sophistication." He moved toward the door, his energy suddenly focused and purposeful. "Mr. Hartwell, I require immediate access to your telegraph facilities. There are inquiries to be made that cannot await the morning. Inspector, Sir Bartholomew's luggage must be examined with the utmost care. And Mr. Cobb, you will accompany us to your master's London residence. If his study was to be prepared, as the telegram indicated, and someone expected to conduct business there tonight, we must discover what that business was and why it required the elaborate charade of a train that arrived tomorrow." As we prepared to leave the office, the fog outside seemed to press against the windows with renewed intensity, as though the very atmosphere of London conspired to shroud this impossible crime in appropriate mystery. Yet I could see in Holmes's expression that familiar gleam of intellectual excitement that appeared whenever a particularly challenging puzzle began to reveal its underlying structure. The game, as he would say, was afoot. The telegraph office at Victoria Station provided Holmes with the communication hub he required to orchestrate his investigation across multiple fronts simultaneously. The night operator, though bleary-eyed from his late vigil, watched with growing fascination as my friend composed a series of urgent inquiries with the precision of a master strategist deploying his forces. "First message to Edinburgh Waverley Station," Holmes dictated rapidly, his mind clearly working several steps ahead of his words. "Require immediate verification. Passenger manifest 8:15 departure this morning. Stop particular attention compartment reservations and any scheduling modifications past 48 hours. Stop reply. Urgent stop, Holmes." He paused, his fingers drumming against the wooden counter as he formulated his next move. "Second message to the North British Railway Personnel Office. Request complete list. Any employees dismissed or resigned past 3 months with engineering or scheduling expertise. Stop confidential investigation. Stop reply. Baker Street. Stop Holmes." As the operator's key began its staccato transmission into the fog-shrouded night, Holmes turned his attention to examining Sir Bartholomew's luggage with that methodical thoroughness that characterized all his investigations. The 2 leather trunks bore the all expected travel labels, but Holmes's magnifying glass revealed details invisible to casual observation. Within the first trunk, beneath carefully folded clothing, he discovered a fitted compartment clearly designed for books and papers. "Observe, Watson," he murmured, running his finger along a rectangular impression in the velvet lining. The missing journal resided here during the journey, yet somehow departed the trunk before our examination. He collected several tiny metallic fragments from the corner of the compartment, holding them up to the gaslight. Brass filings consistent with the corner fittings Cobb described, the journal was forcibly removed, leaving these traces of its presence. Our journey through London's fog-enshrouded streets to Sir Bartholomew's Belgravia residence provided an opportunity for further questioning of the increasingly nervous valet. Cobb's answers painted a picture of a methodical gentleman whose recent behaviour had deviated significantly from established patterns, particularly regarding the timing of his Edinburgh visits and his growing anxiety about mysterious correspondence. The house itself stood in elegant Georgian splendour, its darkened windows suggesting the peaceful repose of an unoccupied residence. However, as we approached the front entrance, Holmes suddenly raised his hand in warning, his keen eyes fixed upon a ground-floor window where a faint light flickered behind partially drawn curtains. "Mr. Cobb," Holmes whispered urgently, "you are certain you extinguished all illumination before departing for the station?" The valet's face paled with alarm. "Absolutely certain, sir. It is my invariable practice to ensure complete darkness when the house is unoccupied." Holmes gestured for us to take concealment in the shadow of a neighbouring doorway, from which vantage point we could observe the lighted study without revealing our presence. Through the gap in the curtains, we could discern a figure moving with systematic purpose among the room's furnishings, clearly conducting a thorough search of the premises. "A woman," Holmes observed after several minutes of careful surveillance, "and one familiar with the house's layout. Note how she moves directly to specific locations without the hesitation of an unfamiliar intruder. She is searching for something particular, examining documents with the methodical care of someone following a predetermined plan." Indeed, the silhouetted figure displayed none of the haste or random destruction typical of common burglary. Instead, she examined papers by lamplight, consulted what appeared to be notes, and paid particular attention to a large cabinet that stood open in one corner of the study. "The document's safe," Cobb breathed in amazement. "Sir Bartholomew never left it unsecured. The combination was known only to himself." "Which suggests our visitor possesses either intimate knowledge of Sir Bartholomew's habits or considerable expertise in such matters," Holmes replied grimly. "Inspector Lestrade, I believe we should announce our presence, but with appropriate caution." Holmes examined the front door lock with his magnifying glass, finding no evidence of forced entry. The door handle turned easily under his touch, confirming that our mysterious intruder had gained access through skill rather than violence. We entered the hallway silently, the thick Persian carpet muffling our footsteps as we approached the study door, which stood slightly ajar. Through this narrow opening we could observe the woman more clearly. She appeared to be of middle years, elegantly dressed despite the late hour, with dark hair arranged in a continental style. Her movements were quick and efficient as she examined the contents of various files, and I noticed she wore thin leather gloves that suggested considerable premeditation. Holmes positioned himself to observe her activities while remaining concealed, and what we witnessed would prove crucial to understanding the elaborate deception surrounding Sir Bartholomew's death. The woman had discovered something of particular significance among the papers, holding a document up to her lamplight with an expression of intense satisfaction. As she did so, the illumination revealed her features clearly, and Mr. Cobb's sharp intake of breath confirmed what Holmes had already deduced. We had found the mysterious EC, and she had found whatever she had come seeking in the dead man's study. The woman's composure proved remarkable as Holmes stepped into the lamplight, his tall figure casting a commanding shadow across the study's elegant furnishings. Rather than startling or attempting flight, she straightened with the dignity of someone accustomed to unexpected confrontations, though her dark eyes assessed each of us with the calculating precision of a chess master evaluating her opponents. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I presume?" she said in accented English that confirmed Cobb's earlier observations about her continental origins. "Your reputation for appearing at precisely the most inconvenient moments precedes you." She held the document she had been examining against her chest, protective yet not entirely defensive. "I am Madame Élise Courvoisier, legal representative for certain interests connected to the late Lord Ashford's estate." Holmes advanced into the room with measured steps, his keen eyes cataloguing every detail of both the woman's appearance and the study's current state. Papers were arranged in neat piles across the mahogany desk, suggesting systematic examination rather than desperate searching, while various filing cabinets stood open in a manner that spoke of methodical investigation. "Indeed, Madame Courvoisier," Holmes replied with perfect courtesy, settling into Sir Bartholomew's desk chair with an air of casual authority. "Though I confess myself curious about legal representatives who conduct their business at midnight in the studies of deceased clients. Perhaps you would enlighten us as to the nature of your nocturnal consultation?" Madame Courvoisier moved with fluid grace to position herself near the fireplace, where she could observe all of us simultaneously while maintaining access to potential escape routes. Sir Bartholomew was not merely attending to routine estate matters in Edinburgh, Mr. Holmes. He was investigating certain irregularities in the mining operations that suggested systematic embezzlement by the estate's trustees. The evidence he had gathered would have exposed a conspiracy involving several prominent figures in both Scotland and London. "And this evidence," Holmes observed, "was contained in his personal journal, which has mysteriously vanished from his luggage." "The journal was but one element," she replied carefully. "Sir Bartholomew had also secured documentation of fraudulent transactions and testimony from former employees. He carried these materials with him, intending to present them to his London solicitors this morning." Holmes leaned forward with obvious interest, his fingers steepled in that characteristic gesture. Yet someone ensured he would never reach that appointment. "Tell me, madam, how did you gain access to Sir Bartholomew's study, and more particularly to his document safe, which Mr. Cobb assures us was secured by a combination known only to his master?" For the first time, a slight smile played about her lips. "You are as perceptive as your reputation suggests, Mr. Holmes. The safe was indeed locked, but observe." She gestured toward the iron cabinet, its door standing open without visible signs of forced entry. "No scratches at the wards, no scoring of the paint around the spindle. I possessed neither the combination nor the crude tools of a common burglar." Holmes rose and examined the safe with his magnifying glass, paying particular attention to the locking mechanism. "Fascinating. The tumblers show no signs of manipulation, yet the lock was clearly opened by someone with intimate knowledge of its operation." He paused, studying Madame Courvoisier with renewed interest. "The faint bloom of blue wool fibre upon your glove, the slight smudge of paraffin on your index finger, and most tellingly, the methodical arrangement of papers suggest not forced entry but careful preparation. You employed a locksmith's candle to study the reflection of the tumblers upon the polished gauge, did you not?" Her composure faltered slightly, revealing genuine surprise at the accuracy of his deduction. "Sir Bartholomew was a cautious man, Mr. Holmes, but he was also methodical in his habits. Through careful observation during my legitimate visits to discuss estate matters, I was able to deduce the combination from his unconscious movements when accessing the safe." "A remarkable feat of observation," Holmes acknowledged. "Now then, what of the gentleman with distinctive red whiskers who visited Sir Bartholomew so frequently? The consulting engineer whom Mr. Cobb observed, carrying a leather satchel and claiming expertise in mining operations. Madame Courvoisier's expression darkened noticeably. Mr. Fergus Drummond. He calls himself an engineer, though I suspect his expertise lies in areas far removed from legitimate mining consultation. He proposed certain methods to Sir Bartholomew, methods that my client found increasingly disturbing. It was Drummond who suggested that the evidence of embezzlement could be turned to profitable advantage rather than exposed through proper legal channels. Blackmail, Holmes observed grimly. Precisely. Sir Bartholomew grew afraid of Drummond, yet found himself unable to extricate himself from the man's influence. Drummond possessed both the technical knowledge and the criminal connections necessary to orchestrate complex deceptions. She paused, glancing toward the document she held. Including, I suspect, the manipulation of railway schedules that resulted in tonight's impossible arrival. Holmes's eyes brightened with the satisfaction of a hunter who had caught sight of his quarry. "And what is that document you guard so carefully, madame?" She hesitated momentarily before extending the paper toward him. "A railway authorization form, stamped at Edinburgh and countersigned by a scheduling clerk. It grants permission for a special working, a non-advertised train service. The date shows tomorrow, yet the counter-signature bears today's seal." Holmes examined the document with intense concentration, his magnifying glass revealing details invisible to casual observation. Remarkable. This authorization would have permitted the operation of an unscheduled service, effectively creating a train that existed outside normal timetables. Yet Sir Bartholomew's death aboard this very service suggests he discovered the deception too late to prevent it. "He sent word that he had cancelled the authorization," Madame Courvoisier said quietly. "He promised to provide me with evidence that the special working had been rescinded. Instead, I find this document confirming that the train was permitted to run." Holmes returned the authorization to her with a thoughtful expression. "Madame Courvoisier, you are in considerable danger. Mr. Drummond will not forgive your presence here tonight, and he will assume you have discovered whatever evidence Sir Bartholomew died protecting." He moved toward the door, his energies suddenly focused and purposeful. "I advise you to seek secure lodgings and avoid any location where Drummond might expect to find you." As we prepared to leave the study, Holmes paused beside the desk, lifting the blotting pad to examine it under the lamplight. With a few light strokes of his pencil, he brought up the ghostly impressions of Sir Bartholomew's final writings, a column of times and place names, each marked with cryptic symbols. "Waverley, Falkirk, Carstairs, Berwick," Holmes read aloud. Our friend was documenting the special workings' progress, marking each station where the deception would be maintained. And here, at the bottom, Whitmore, conductor. Sir Bartholomew trusted the conductor to provide testimony about the train's true nature. Madame Courvoisier studied the spectral writing with growing alarm. "If Drummond discovers that Whitmore possesses such knowledge—" "Indeed," Holmes replied, grimly. "Inspector Lestrade, we must ensure Mr. Whitmore's safety before dawn. This conspiracy reaches far deeper than a simple murder disguised as natural death. We are confronting a criminal organization with the resources and expertise to manipulate an entire railway system." As we stepped out into the fog-shrouded London night, I could see in Holmes's expression that familiar gleam of intellectual excitement tempered by genuine concern for the innocent parties caught in this web of deception. The impossible train had delivered more than a dead man. It had brought us face to face with a conspiracy that challenged the very foundations of trust upon which civilized society depended. Our return journey to Victoria Station through the fog-shrouded streets carried an urgency that seemed to communicate itself even to our cab horse, whose hooves struck the wet cobblestones with increased tempo. Holmes sat forward in his seat, his keen eyes piercing the murky darkness, as though he could discern through sheer force of will the location of the missing conductor whose testimony had become crucial to unraveling this elaborate deception. The station presented a scene of controlled chaos upon our arrival. Inspector Lestrade met us at the entrance with an expression that combined professional concern with barely concealed frustration, while railway officials clustered in nervous consultation near the platform, where our phantom train continued its silent vigil like some mechanical spectre from another realm. "Holmes, we have a serious development," Lestrade announced without preamble. Thomas Whitmore departed his lodgings at midnight, accompanied by two gentlemen who claimed to represent urgent railway business. His landlady reports that he left willingly carrying a small valise, but appeared nervous and repeatedly consulted his pocket watch. Holmes accepted this information with that characteristic stillness that indicated his mind was already working at tremendous speed to process the implications. The lure was professional in nature, Inspector, designed to exploit Whitmore's sense of duty rather than his fears. Our adversaries understand the psychology of railway personnel with considerable sophistication. Mr. Hartwell approached our group with obvious agitation, extending a crumpled telegram form toward Holmes. "This was found in the conductor's restroom, sir. Apparently dropped in haste." The cleaning staff discovered it wedged beneath a bench. Holmes examined the yellow paper with his magnifying glass, paying particular attention to the quality of the stock and the characteristics of the handwriting. "Commercial telegraph dispatched from the Southwark office at 11:47 this evening. The message requests Whitmore's immediate presence at the goods yard near London Bridge for consultation regarding irregularities in tonight's service documentation." He paused, studying the signature with intense concentration. "Signed by one F. Morrison, Chief Inspector of Operations, a position that exists within railway hierarchy, but whose current occupant is, I suspect, quite different from our mysterious correspondent." "A trap," Lestrade observed grimly. "Indeed, but one that reveals our adversaries' methods with remarkable clarity," Holmes replied, pocketing the telegram. "They possess sufficient knowledge of railway protocols to craft convincing official communications, yet they made one crucial error." He indicated a small smudge near the bottom of the form. "This mark was made by a seal ring bearing a distinctive crest impressed while the ink remained wet. The same crest that appeared on documents in Sir Bartholomew's study. Our investigation of the conductor's restroom revealed additional evidence of hasty departure. Holmes discovered beneath the wooden bench a small leather notebook, its pages filled with Whitmore's careful notations regarding the evening's unusual journey. The entries, written in the precise hand of an experienced railway professional, documented several irregularities that had troubled the conductor during the phantom train's impossible passage. "Observe, Watson," Holmes said, reading from the notebook's final entries. "At Berwick, an unscheduled inspection of the first-class lighting systems. At Carstairs, a brief stop for valve maintenance, conducted by a man in railway overalls who departed immediately afterward. At Falkirk, the mysterious headboard change that transformed a legitimate service into our impossible tomorrow express." The notebook's most revealing entry appeared on the final page, written in obvious haste. "Passenger in compartment 7 appeared distressed during valve inspection, heard voices through partition, one speaking with Scottish accent about completion of arrangements. Same passenger found deceased upon arrival. Circumstances require investigation." Holmes closed the notebook with satisfaction. Mr. Whitmore was more observant than our conspirators anticipated. His testimony would have exposed the precise methodology of their deception, identifying the specific points along the route where Sir Bartholomew's murder was orchestrated. "Then he's in mortal danger," I observed. "Undoubtedly, but his captors face a dilemma," Holmes replied thoughtfully. "Whitmore's disappearance will itself raise questions, while his death would create an investigation that might expose their railway connections. They require his silence without creating additional complications." Holmes consulted his pocket watch, noting that dawn remained several hours distant. "Inspector, we must assume that Whitmore is being held at a location where his captors can control both access and communication. The goods yard near London Bridge offers such advantages with multiple warehouses and limited police patrol." As we prepared to depart for this new destination, Holmes issued final instructions with military precision. "Mr. Hartwell, the Phantom train must remain under constant guard. No documentation is to be altered or removed without my express authorization. The evidence it contains may prove crucial to exposing the full scope of this conspiracy." The fog seemed to thicken as we stepped once more into the London night, and I found myself reflecting on how this case had evolved from a simple mystery of impossible scheduling into a complex web of murder, forgery, and systematic corruption that threatened to undermine the very foundations of commercial trust upon which our modern society depended. Our journey through London's fog-shrouded streets toward the goods yards near London Bridge carried an urgency that seemed to permeate even the thick mist surrounding our hansom cab. Holmes sat forward, his keen mind already working several moves ahead, as he formulated our approach to what had become a race against time to save the conductor, whose testimony could expose the entire conspiracy. "The key to understanding this elaborate deception, Watson," Holmes observed as we navigated the increasingly industrial landscape south of the Thames, "lies in recognizing that our opponents have created the perfect misdirection. Sir Bartholomew's death aboard an impossible train focuses all attention on the mechanical puzzle of scheduling rather than the financial irregularities he had uncovered. His evidence disappears with him while investigators waste precious time attempting to explain a railway phenomenon that defies rational analysis." Inspector Lestrade leaned forward with obvious concern. "But surely Whitmore's disappearance will raise additional questions?" "Indeed, which places our adversaries in a delicate position," Holmes replied. "They require his silence without creating the complications that his death would bring. This suggests they will attempt persuasion before resorting to more permanent solutions." The goods yard sprawled before us like some industrial underworld, its maze of railway sidings, warehouses, and loading platforms providing countless locations where a man could be held without detection. The night watchman confirmed that unusual activity had been observed in the eastern section, where several gentlemen had arrived with official authorization to inspect stored materials. Holmes examined the authorization document with his magnifying glass, immediately identifying the same forged seal ring impression that had appeared on previous fraudulent papers. "Consistent in their methods, though perhaps overly confident," he observed grimly. Moving through the fog-shrouded yard, Holmes began his methodical tracking, his trained eye cataloguing every disturbance in the muddy ground. Near a stack of timber, he paused to examine faint impressions in the earth. "Here, Watson, the distinct pattern of constables' boots, followed by lighter soles consistent with Whitmore's walking shoes, and observe this deeper impression with the pointed toe, a fashionable rather than practical choice for night work in a goods yard." Following these traces led us to a large warehouse whose grimy windows showed faint illumination despite the late hour. Holmes struck a match near the building's entrance, watching its flame carefully. "Petroleum residue mixed with coal dust," he murmured, rubbing the substance between his fingers. "Too light for locomotive fuel. Pinch gas cylinders have been moved through here recently." As we positioned ourselves for observation, Holmes discovered an overturned crate bearing Edinburgh Car Lighting Department stenciling. Within the broken sealing wax, a tiny blue fibre caught his attention. "Our elusive thread returns, Watson, the same worsted fibre from Sir Bartholomew's compartment window." Through a gap in the warehouse's grimy windows, we could observe the scene within. Whitmore sat at an improvised desk, surrounded by several men, including one with distinctive red whiskers, who could only be Fergus Drummond. The conductor was examining documents while Drummond gestured persuasively, occasionally producing what appeared to be substantial banknotes. "They're attempting to purchase his cooperation," Holmes whispered. "Observe Whitmore's posture. He maintains his dignity despite the circumstances." Indeed, as we watched, Whitmore's reaction was immediate and decisive. He pushed the money away while rising from his chair with obvious indignation, his words, clearly those of a man rejecting an offer he found morally repugnant. "Excellent," Holmes murmured approvingly. "Mr. Whitmore possesses the integrity his profession requires, but his refusal places him in considerable peril." The situation changed dramatically as Drummond's demeanour shifted from persuasive to threatening. Two additional men emerged from the shadows, their movements suggesting professional experience with violence, while a faint hissing sound became audible even through the warehouse walls. Holmes rose with sudden decision. "Gas," he said sharply. "They're attempting to silence him permanently while maintaining the appearance of accident. Inspector, we cannot delay further." Moving swiftly to a side entrance, Holmes produced his lockpicks and worked with practiced efficiency. Within moments, we entered the warehouse to find Whitmore slumped over the desk, his breathing shallow but steady. Holmes immediately located the gas valve and shut off the flow while I opened windows to clear the poisonous atmosphere. "They said it would be but a few minutes," Whitmore gasped as we helped him to fresh air. "A correction to be signed, then home. They told me not to strike a light." His eyes found Holmes and steadied. "Mr. Holmes, I would have spoken to you. I kept the notes." "You shall, and where the air is clean," Holmes replied. "But first, who brought you here?" The red-whiskered man and another, well-dressed with soft hands and a habit of pinching his signet ring. They wanted a statement that Sir Bartholomew had complained of palpitations, that I had promised to alert a physician. I refused. A sudden crash above indicated our quarry's escape attempt, but Holmes restrained Lestrade's pursuit. "We have what we came for," he said, examining documents left on the desk. A draft correction attributing the scheduling confusion to printing errors, and more importantly, this ledger entry recording 12 cylinders consigned to T. Whitby at barge 317 Blackwall Stairs, dawn tide. Whitmore produced his notebook, now bulked with additional observations. "I documented everything, Mr. Holmes. The stops where men boarded at Carstairs and Falkirk, the headboard change, the hours that disagreed. And what I heard through the partition, the Scotsman saying, 'By tomorrow it will be as if it never were.'" "Tomorrow?" Holmes repeated thoughtfully. A word pressed into service as alibi. He straightened with renewed purpose. "Inspector, we must alert the river police immediately. At first light, barge 317 will clear for Blackwall with the gas cylinders used to murder Sir Bartholomew. Our adversaries are moving their evidence by water, but we shall be there to receive them." As dawn began to pale the eastern sky, I could see in Holmes's expression that familiar intensity that appeared when all the pieces of a complex puzzle began falling into their proper places. The phantom train had delivered more than a corpse. It had brought us face to face with a conspiracy that challenged the very foundations of commercial trust. And now we were positioned to bring it to its inevitable conclusion. The journey through London's fog-shrouded streets toward Blackwall Stairs carried the weight of impending resolution, our hansom cab navigating the increasingly industrial landscape as dawn began its slow conquest of the persistent mist. Holmes sat forward with that characteristic intensity that indicated his mind was already several moves ahead, orchestrating the final act of this elaborate drama with the precision of a master chess player approaching checkmate. "The Thames at dawn, Watson?" Holmes observed as we approached the ancient stairs that descended into the murky waters like weathered stone teeth. There is something profoundly fitting about confronting our adversaries at the very moment when night surrenders to day, when shadows must yield to illumination. His keen eyes surveyed the maze of barges, lighters, and commercial vessels that crowded the historic waterway. The river police had positioned themselves with admirable discretion, their presence barely detectable among the legitimate early morning traffic. Sergeant Baines, a compact man with the steady demeanour of one accustomed to Thames-side confrontations, indicated a low barge moored near the timber wharf, its deck arranged with suspicious precision. "Barge 317, Mr. Holmes," he reported quietly. Two men observed loading cylindrical cargo since before first light. The systematic arrangement suggests professional handling rather than casual stevedoring. Holmes examined the vessel through his pocket telescope, his expression growing increasingly satisfied as he catalogued the evidence before him. "Observe the cargo arrangement, Watson. 12-pint gas cylinders, each bearing the distinctive brass fittings of railway lighting equipment, yet positioned with the care one might reserve for volatile materials. Indeed, as we watched from concealment behind a stack of timber, the two figures on the barge's deck worked with methodical precision that spoke of considerable expertise. Drummond's distinctive red whiskers were unmistakable even in the dim morning light, while his companion, a well-dressed gentleman with the soft hands and nervous gestures that Whitmore had described, supervised the operation with obvious anxiety. Holmes waited until the loading was nearly complete before making his decisive move. Rising from concealment with theatrical timing that would have done credit to the finest actor, he stepped into full view while positioning himself to block their most direct escape route. "Gentlemen," Holmes announced, his voice carrying clearly across the water, "I believe you have overlooked certain crucial details in your haste to dispose of the evidence." Drummond's reaction confirmed his guilt more effectively than any confession. Rather than expressing surprise or attempting innocuous explanation, he immediately reached inside his coat with the practiced motion of a man accustomed to violence. However, Holmes had anticipated this response, and the river police moved with coordinated efficiency to surround the barge. "Mr. Drummond," Holmes continued with perfect composure, "your expertise in railway engineering has been employed most ingeniously, though to deplorable ends. Inspector Lestrade, if you would examine the nearest cylinder while I retrieve something of particular interest." Holmes approached the cargo with the methodical care of a scientist conducting crucial experiments. Selecting a cylinder that showed signs of recent tampering, he examined its brass fittings with his magnifying glass before carefully opening the valve mechanism. A faint, sweet odour escaped, and Holmes nodded with grim satisfaction. "Chloroform, administered through the carriage's ventilation system," he announced, producing a small wax plug pierced with a hair-fine hole. The valve was modified to release the anaesthetic gradually, ensuring Sir Bartholomew's peaceful demise while maintaining the appearance of natural death. From the same cylinder, he extracted a familiar leather-bound volume with brass corners. "Sir Bartholomew's journal," Holmes continued, opening it to reveal pages of meticulous documentation. "Our victim was more observant than you anticipated, Mr. Drummond. He recorded every irregularity in your phantom trains operation, from the unscheduled valve inspections to the mysterious headboard changes that transformed a legitimate service into your impossible express." Whitmore, who had accompanied us despite his recent ordeal, stepped forward with obvious courage. That's the man who offered me £50 to sign a false statement about Sir Bartholomew's health, claiming he had complained of heart palpitations during the journey. Holmes examined the journal's final entries with intense concentration. Times and stations, Watson: Waverley, Carstairs, Falkirk, Berwick, and here a note against Carstairs. Valve attention, stranger's voice through partition, discussing completion of arrangements. Sir Bartholomew had unravelled your methodology completely. Drummond's composure finally cracked as he realised the hopelessness of his position. Ashford was going to ruin everything, he snarled. Years of profitable arrangements with the mining interests all threatened by one man's inconvenient conscience. And so you created the Phantom Train, Holmes replied. A masterpiece of misdirection that transformed murder into mystery, focusing attention on the impossible scheduling rather than the crime itself. Yet your very cleverness proved your undoing, for it required the cooperation of too many individuals, each representing a potential weakness in your elaborate deception. As the constables secured our prisoners and their incriminating cargo, I reflected on how Holmes had once again demonstrated his remarkable ability to penetrate the most sophisticated criminal schemes. The dawn light strengthened, dispelling the fog that had shrouded our investigation from its mysterious beginning, and I knew we were approaching the final resolution of this extraordinary case. The morning light streaming through the grimy windows of the River Police Office revealed details that the lanterns of night had concealed, and Holmes examined our prisoners with the methodical attention of a naturalist cataloguing new species. The well-dressed gentleman who had accompanied Drummond possessed hands that spoke of comfortable living, yet his nervous habit of touching a heavy signet ring betrayed an anxiety that belied his composed demeanour. "Your papers, sir," Holmes requested with perfect courtesy, though his tone carried an authority that brooked no refusal. "Eustace Carlyle?" the man replied with brittle dignity, producing an embossed card from his waistcoat. "Justice of the peace for Midlothian and trustee of the late Lord Ashford's estate. This unfortunate misunderstanding will be clarified when proper legal counsel arrives." Holmes examined the card with his magnifying glass, paying particular attention to the embossed crest that matched perfectly the signet ring upon Carlyle's finger. "A rampant stag surmounting a shield, Mr. Carlyle. The same device that has appeared impressed in wax upon various documents throughout our investigation." He handed the card to Inspector Lestrade. "I believe you will find this crest matches the seal marks on the forged railway authorizations." A messenger arrived at that moment bearing telegrams redirected from Baker Street, and Holmes read them with growing satisfaction. Confirmation from Edinburgh Waverley that the special working authorization was indeed raised and rescinded within the same day, countersigned by one Thomas Whitby, lately resigned from his position as scheduling clerk. The North British Railway Personnel Office reports that Mr. Whitby departed service without notice, leaving no forwarding address. Holmes opened Sir Bartholomew's recovered journal, its leather binding still bearing traces of the hiding place where it had been concealed. "Listen to this entry from 3 days before his death, Watson. Carlyle grows increasingly insistent that the mining irregularities be handled discreetly. His associate Drummond claims revolutionary methods for resolving transportation difficulties, yet their proposals trouble me greatly. The authorization documents they present bear official seals, yet something in their manner suggests deception." "Sir Bartholomew was more observant than you anticipated," Holmes continued, addressing Carlyle directly. "He documented every suspicious conversation, every questionable proposal, every indication that the estate's financial difficulties were being exploited for criminal purposes." The door opened to admit Madame Courvoisier, escorted by a constable and carrying a leather portfolio that she placed upon the table with decisive authority. "Mr. Holmes, I discovered additional documents in Sir Bartholomew's study after your departure. The conspiracy extends far beyond simple embezzlement. Holmes examined the papers she presented, his eyebrows rising with interest as he studied detailed railway maps marked with timing notations and route modifications. Remarkable. They have created an entire shadow system capable of moving personnel and materials without official documentation throughout Scotland and northern England. The mining estate was merely one element, Madame Courvoisier explained urgently. Sir Bartholomew's investigation had uncovered systematic corruption involving multiple railway lines, falsified schedules, and criminal transportation networks. His evidence would have exposed not merely financial irregularities, but organized criminal activities spanning several counties. Carlyle's composure finally cracked as he realized the scope of evidence arrayed against him. Ashford was an interfering amateur, he snarled. His conscience would have destroyed profitable arrangements that had operated successfully for years. And so you arranged his death. Aboard an impossible train, Holmes replied grimly. A masterpiece of misdirection that transformed murder into mystery, focusing all investigative attention on the scheduling anomaly rather than the underlying crime. Holmes rose and began his familiar pacing, his energy focused and purposeful as he prepared for the final phase of his investigation. Inspector Lestrade, I believe we have sufficient evidence to hold these gentlemen on charges of conspiracy and murder. However, the network they represent extends beyond our current prisoners. He consulted his pocket watch, noting that the morning was well advanced. The missing Clerk Whitby must be located, as must the various railway personnel who facilitated their deceptions. I propose to employ a small stratagem of my own to draw out the remaining conspirators. What manner of stratagem, Holmes? I inquired, recognizing the gleam of intellectual excitement that appeared whenever he prepared to spring his final trap. A carefully crafted invitation that will appeal to their greed while exploiting their fears, he replied, already drafting telegrams in his mind. We shall announce that certain evidence remains unaccounted for, that witnesses require silencing, and that urgent consultation is needed to prevent complete exposure. As Holmes arranged his materials with characteristic precision, I could see that we were approaching the climactic resolution of this extraordinary case. The phantom train had delivered far more than a corpse. It had exposed a criminal conspiracy of remarkable sophistication that threatened the very foundations of commercial trust upon which our modern society depended. The game, as Holmes would say, was entering its final moves, and I sensed that the morning would bring revelations that would astound even those who had witnessed the impossible arrival of the train that came tomorrow. Holmes's stratagem revealed itself to be a masterpiece of psychological manipulation, combining the systematic approach of a military campaign with the subtle artistry of a master angler. Within the hour, he had orchestrated a multi-pronged assault upon the remaining conspirators that exploited their fundamental weaknesses with surgical precision. The beauty of criminal enterprises, Watson, Holmes observed as he composed his carefully worded communications, lies in their dependence upon secrecy and mutual trust. When that trust is shattered, the entire structure collapses with remarkable swiftness. His first move involved placing a discreet advertisement in the afternoon edition of the Commercial Gazette, a publication known to circulate among London's business community. The notice offered a substantial reward for information regarding certain financial documents belonging to the late Sir Bartholomew Ashford, believed to contain details of railway consortium operations and passenger manifests of particular sensitivity. Simultaneously, Holmes dispatched a series of telegrams to railway offices throughout Scotland and northern England, each message carefully crafted to suggest that crucial evidence remained unaccounted for and that urgent consultation was required to prevent complete exposure. The genius of this approach lay in its ability to trigger panic among the conspirators while providing Holmes with a comprehensive map of their network's extent. The response exceeded even Holmes's optimistic expectations. By early afternoon, replies began flooding into the telegraph office, each message revealing another thread in the web of corruption. From Edinburgh came word that 3 scheduling clerks had abandoned their positions without notice, while Newcastle reported the sudden departure of several locomotive drivers. Each fleeing criminal represented another confirmation of the conspiracy's systematic nature. "Observe the pattern, Inspector," Holmes remarked to Lestrade, as they arranged the incoming telegrams in chronological order. "Our announcement has created a cascade of fear that reveals the precise structure of their organization. Each departure represents not merely a criminal fleeing justice, but a node in their network that we can now map with complete accuracy." The trap Holmes had set using the newspaper advertisement proved equally effective. The offices above Hartwell's haberdashery in Bloomsbury, hastily rented for the afternoon, became the focal point for a carefully orchestrated ambush. Holmes positioned himself in the adjacent building with a clear view of the entrance, while plainclothes constables took up seemingly casual positions throughout the street. At precisely 3:30, a nervous gentleman in a worn overcoat approached the building, glancing repeatedly over his shoulder with the furtive manner of someone engaged in clandestine business. Thomas Whitby, the missing scheduling clerk whose forged authorizations had made the phantom train possible, had taken the bait with gratifying predictability. "Greed and desperation make poor counsellors," Holmes murmured, as the constables moved with practiced efficiency to secure their quarry. From Whitby's coat pocket tumbled a small notebook containing detailed records of unauthorized schedule modifications, along with a list of railway personnel who had been compromised through bribery or coercion. The afternoon brought a steady stream of additional arrests as Holmes's systematic approach bore fruit throughout the network. The genuine Chief Inspector Morrison of the North British Railway arrived with official documentation that confirmed every irregularity Holmes had identified, while telegraph reports detailed the capture of fleeing conspirators at stations from Carlisle to Newcastle. The phantom train was their masterpiece of misdirection, Holmes explained to the assembled group as evidence continued to accumulate. By creating a service that existed outside normal schedules, they could transport evidence, witnesses, and contraband without leaving official traces. Sir Bartholomew's murder was intended to be the perfect crime disguised as natural death aboard an impossible conveyance that would focus all investigative attention on the scheduling mystery rather than the underlying conspiracy. Carlyle, faced with the overwhelming evidence of his network's collapse, finally abandoned his pretense of innocence. "You cannot comprehend the profits involved, Holmes," he said with bitter resignation. "The mining operations alone generated thousands monthly, while our transportation services commanded premium rates from clients requiring absolute discretion. Yet your very sophistication proved your undoing," Holmes replied thoughtfully. "An organization that required such elaborate deception to function could not survive the exposure of its methods. When Sir Bartholomew's investigation threatened discovery, you chose the most complex possible solution, rather than accepting the simple expedient of abandoning your criminal enterprise." As evening approached, the systematic collapse of the conspiracy confirmed Holmes's analysis of its fundamental weakness. The final telegram arrived from Edinburgh, reporting the arrest of the last significant conspirator, a signal box operator whose manipulation of train routing had been crucial to their success. "Inspector Lestrade," Holmes said with evident satisfaction, "I believe we now possess sufficient evidence to ensure convictions on charges ranging from murder to systematic fraud across multiple jurisdictions. The phantom train has completed its final journey, delivering not passengers to tomorrow, but justice to today. As we prepared to return to Baker Street, I reflected on how this extraordinary case had demonstrated the vulnerability of even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises when confronted with Holmes's methodical approach to investigation. The fog that had shrouded London during our inquiry had finally lifted completely, revealing the city in all its bustling vitality. Yet I knew that somewhere among its millions of inhabitants, other mysteries awaited our attention. "Come, Watson," Holmes said, consulting his pocket watch with the satisfaction of a man whose work had been completed to his exacting standards. "Mrs. Hudson will be wondering what has become of us, and I find myself quite ready to exchange the complexities of criminal conspiracy for the simple pleasure of a proper meal and the comfort of our familiar sitting room." The impossible had been made possible through careful observation and logical deduction, and the train that had arrived tomorrow had finally reached its true destination in the halls of justice. The familiar comfort of our Baker Street sitting room provided a welcome sanctuary after the extraordinary events that had consumed the past 48 hours, and as Holmes settled into his favourite chair with the evening papers, I found myself reflecting on how this most perplexing of cases had reached its inevitable conclusion. The fire crackled pleasantly in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the accumulated evidence that Holmes had arranged with characteristic precision upon our table, each item now serving as a silent witness to the elaborate conspiracy we had successfully unravelled. Inspector Lestrade arrived as the church bells struck 9, bearing news that confirmed the complete collapse of the criminal network. "Carlyle received 20 years' transportation," he reported with evident satisfaction, settling into the chair beside our hearth. Drummond drew the same sentence, while Whitby and the various railway conspirators received terms ranging from 5 to 15 years, depending upon their level of involvement. The mining estate has been placed under proper administration, with Madame Courvoisier appointed as legal representative to ensure legitimate interests are protected. Holmes accepted this information with the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman whose work had been completed to his exacting standards. The beauty of their downfall, Inspector, lay in the very sophistication they believed made them invulnerable. By creating an impossible train, they focused all attention on the scheduling mystery rather than the underlying crime, yet this elaborate misdirection required the cooperation of too many individuals, each representing a potential weakness in their deception. A soft knock interrupted our discussion, and Mrs. Hudson announced the arrival of Thomas Whitmore, who had requested permission to express his gratitude personally. The conductor entered with the dignified bearing of a man whose professional integrity had been vindicated, carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said with obvious emotion, "the railway company has offered me promotion to inspector, with responsibility for implementing new security measures. I wanted to thank you for preserving not merely my life, but my reputation." The package contained a beautifully crafted model locomotive, complete in every detail down to the brass fittings and painted destination board, reading simply, "Truth." Holmes accepted the gift with genuine pleasure, examining its craftsmanship with the appreciation of one who understood the skill required for such work. "Mr. Whitmore, this shall occupy a place of honour upon our mantelpiece, serving as a reminder that integrity remains our most reliable ally in pursuing justice." After Whitmore's departure, Holmes placed the model locomotive where it caught the firelight with appropriate symbolism, then began his final analysis of the case with that comprehensive understanding that never ceased to amaze me. The conspiracy succeeded for years because it exploited the fundamental trust upon which our railway system depends. Passengers assume their trains will arrive when scheduled, conductors trust their documentation, station masters rarely question official authorizations. By manipulating these assumptions, our criminals created an entire shadow transportation network. Yet Sir Bartholomew's methodical nature proved their undoing, I observed, consulting my notes from the investigation. Indeed, Watson, his journal documented every irregularity with scientific precision, while Whitmore's professional integrity prevented the complete destruction of evidence. When combined with Madame Courvoisier's legal expertise and our systematic analysis, these records provided an unassailable foundation for prosecution. Holmes rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the fog-free London streets with evident contentment. The case also demonstrates that the most elaborate deceptions often rely upon our willingness to believe in the impossible rather than confront unpleasant reality. They preyed upon the human tendency to seek extraordinary explanations for seemingly extraordinary events, when the truth was entirely conventional murder, disguised through technical sophistication. Holmes returned to his chair, tamping tobacco into his pipe with methodical care. There is something profoundly satisfying about cases that restore faith in human nature. For every Carlyle and Drummond who betrays public trust, we find a Whitmore who maintains integrity despite considerable pressure and personal danger. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself contemplating the broader implications of our investigation. The phantom train had delivered far more than a corpse. It had exposed the vulnerability of systems built upon trust, while simultaneously demonstrating that human courage and methodical observation could triumph over even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises. "The train that arrived tomorrow has finally reached its proper destination," Holmes observed with satisfaction, settling back into his chair as London prepared for peaceful slumber. "Justice delayed, perhaps, but never denied to those with patience and persistence to pursue it methodically." The fire burned low as I reflected on how this extraordinary case had once again demonstrated the triumph of logical analysis over apparently impossible circumstances. Tomorrow would doubtless bring new mysteries, but for now we could rest in the satisfaction of duty well performed and truth properly served.